Now we enter a short phase where each may ask a question of the other, perhaps of clarification or expansion, perhaps a bit of creative thinking, because somebody might have heard a twist or a wrinkle that hadn't been heard before. So we'll continue on in this phase with Matt asking the first question, and then the father will answer, and then the father will ask a question, and we may peter out at that point and go to closing. We'll see how thick this gets.
We want to make sure there's just as much time for individuals in the audience to ask questions as possible, because we could go talk about this over beer, but I can't take everybody for a beer. And I'm fine with your extra 30 seconds since I interrupted you for a joke, which reminded me that I forgot the joke about me being on the dark side of the podium.
Oh, yeah.
At the beginning. And the irony of him being on the far left.
Yeah, and I'm on the far left. That's not either.
I have a number of potential questions, but I think the one that I want to ask, it may be really easy for you to address, is you briefly mentioned, and I know you didn't hammer on this, so I'm not pushing it, the idea of the atheist ties to eugenics and genocide and things like that.
Yeah.
And you made a point. I mean, we can have a long discussion about that, about these things aren't necessarily tied to atheism. But you mentioned that they're corrected from the outside.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, because we haven't talked, but slavery in the United States was supported by the Christian church, by Christian teachings, by biblical passages that explicitly say who you can enslave, how you can treat them, that they are in fact your property to be passed down. This entry into Christendom, the Jewish tradition, essentially, is such that it supported slavery. Now, I don't know what your take is on whether that slavery, because you did something that confused me, because you went near a moral relativistic argument that what was wrong yesterday might not be wrong today. So I'm curious about your take on slavery. Was it once right? Was this God authorizing slavery? Was it right and became wrong? Was it always wrong and they just didn't recognize it? I wonder if you could just kind of give a quick take on that, because from my perspective, slavery was an abomination that was actually corrected outside. It was one of the many things where I mentioned before that secular progressive ideas changed the way religious people thought about what was moral.
Yeah, I think slavery was a vestige of pagan civilization, so tied in economically, it took years and years for people's thinking to even change, to recognize it as the sin that it was. The first indication, the first real resistance against slavery is from the church fathers in the 4th century. St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil, and especially St. Gregory Nazianzus, who just said it was an evil institution. Okay, so that is what elevated people's moral reprehension of slavery, yet they still lived with slavery as an institution. Okay, it took another, well, you know, we had the Civil War, but I think slavery probably really ended with the Civil Rights Movement. Let's say that in the 60s. Okay, that's when the institution of slavery, at least in the West, really ended. I would say, see, I agree with you that a lot of morality is discerned in confronting the difficulties of human life. Okay. A lot of times people have to wake up to the ultimate moral principle, so to speak, before the immorality of slavery is really written on the very fabric of the heart, you know, and before there's a moral reprehensibility that arises from that. It's true that some Christians argued that slavery was, you know, the will of God, but obviously they were wrong, okay? They were wrong. And other Christians challenged it. I would say, though, that the ultimate overthrow of slavery was because of two things. Number one, the abolitionists. The abolitionists were the ones who overthrew slavery. The abolitionists grew out of the Great Awakenings in the late 18th century, and then jumped the ocean, the Methodists, so on and so forth. I mean, abolition was an exclusively Christian response to that crime. And I would say that the final chapter, written during the Civil Rights Movement by Martin Luther King, read his speeches. They were thoroughly Christian in character and judged the discrimination against the black man in thoroughly Christian terms. So, yeah, Christian culture carried a sin forward for many, many years. Some Christians were definitely wrong. But Christianity has, I argue, atheism doesn't have this. Christianity has within it a self-correcting mechanism in that it can judge its own sins. Now, whether people respond to the judgment and do what's right, they're individually free to do whatever they want. But it's there. And that's why I think, too, you have even a sense of moral progress in Western culture. I don't want to keep going. Did I go over?
Oh, that was a marvelous answer.
Oh.
And now, fairness, you have an opportunity to make a question of some sort of math, and then we'll proceed to final closing.
Okay. I think, I've read the New Atheists. I'm not that impressed with them. I think they're more polemical than anything else. And I was telling Matt, he didn't quite get this, so I'm going to talk about this for just a second. I think because we live in a post-Christian age, postmodern age, I think we also live in a post-polemical age. Polemics work when you share the same presuppositions. But we're in an age now where we operate from different presuppositions. Okay, so what I look for is what I call authenticity. And what I mean by authenticity, I go back to the existentialists who I love. I love the French existentialists. I'll tell you why I love them. Because they recovered something from classical Christian culture that was lost, especially on the killing fields of World War I. You know, what happened among the philosophers and the deeper thinkers of the time is that the futility of World War I put an end to the death of the myth of progress. Okay, now, progress exists. Okay, linear time exists. Things have a beginning and an end. They didn't have in the pagan world. They do in the Christian world because the Western world redefined its conceptions according to the narrative in Genesis and not the narrative of the pagans. So what happened here, especially with the rise of materialism again, is that people had such faith in the natural human potential for progress that when World War I happened, they were hit with the sheer absurdity of the death of a generation of their best young men. And Europe collapsed exhausted. And out of that exhaustion arose the existentialists, and they say we have to find our way back to meaning. And what they said was this. They said, man posits his own humanity through his moral actions. I love that, and I'll tell you why. Because they grasp, on a very secular level, but nevertheless true, that man's own sense of self as human and morality were closely related. And so, see, I really get into the story and I forgot my point. Because I love that period. Where was I going with this?
I don't know, it was a question.
Yeah, I know where I was going with this. I saw you and I knew it. I respect, the truth was, I really respect an authentic search for that which is true, even if a person denies God while he's doing it. Because if truth is a separate category, I'm making a speech here, but I'm going to finish it. If truth is a separate category of existence, you're going to end up there if your search is one search, not that, but one search is authentic. Okay? So, I forgot my point, I'm real sorry. But I get excited about World War I. So I get excited about the French existentialists that, and I got to say, Matt, what's going through my mind is I think your search is that. I really do believe it's that because you're not willing to dismiss the objection so easily. Here's my question that came back to me.
Gotcha.
How do you deal with the fact that atheism as a philosophy, not you, Matt, atheism as a philosophy doesn't possess that self-corrective mechanism?
Well, first of all, my response is that atheism, as I view it, isn't in fact a philosophy. It's not a worldview. It's not an ideology. It's a single position on a single issue. And then everything else that I happen to believe is something else. My atheism is a result of the fact that I have not been presented with any God concept that has been supported by sufficient evidence for me to believe it. I am a rational individual. I will change my mind based on evidence. Well, this doesn't actually work in this case, but in many cases when I'm talking to somebody and we're having an actually heated argument, which we're not, I'll point out that of the two of us, I'm the only one who's demonstrated he can change his mind in a major way. I mean, not about like what you want for dinner. My atheism is largely irrelevant. My disbelief in the God propositions is largely irrelevant. What I am, what I do believe, is what's relevant. The type of things that I care about, the values that I have, my search for truth, wherever it is, and the criteria by which I'll accept propositions. That's what's important, which is why I'm a skeptic and a critical thinker and a methodological naturalist as opposed to necessarily a philosophical naturalist, although there's potential there as well. And so, as an end to kind of answering your question, in that I don't hold atheism as a philosophy. My philosophical positions, I don't even know if they fit in a category. In some cases, I'm a secular humanist. In some cases, I'm a materialist. In some cases, I'm a naturalist. I don't know that there's necessarily one category for me. But I do know that what I attempt to do, when I have callers call into the show, I don't define God and then tell them what I don't believe in. That would be crazy. I want them to tell me whatever it is, whether it's God or reptilian aliens who are trying to take over the planet. Tell me whatever it is that you believe and why you believe it. The why is important because I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. Now there must be, in order for this to be viable at all, a method that provides the most reliable results at discerning this truth, at coming to as many true answers and as few false answers as possible. As near as I can tell, reason, the skeptical application of critical thinking, the evaluation of evidence with respect to standards, is the single most demonstrably reliable path to truth. In conversations with other people, it would, will identify different presuppositions, but in many cases, they'll simply make an appeal to faith, which can have no leverage with me, because there's no reliable path to truth there. And what I'm advocating in the secular moral system is that the secular moral system does have a checks and balances, because it is built around a demonstrable, open path to truth. What I'm curious and kind of in my response as a question to you is, clearly you seem to accept reason, you don't have any problem with logic and reasoning. Is there a discernible path to truth that is open to everybody within your paradigm, or does it require faith and individual direct revelation, that type of thing? Because I don't understand how somebody can assert any kind of truth without a demonstration of that truth. And that demonstration has to be open to anybody. And that is kind of how we define reality. It's by reality, the stuff doesn't go away when one of us closes our eyes, or one of us stops believing. So what discernible path to truth is there in, for example, the Christian worldview?